Hello. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Sorry, I'm a little bit delayed tonight. Happens to be that our minion just finished. So next week we might have to start maybe at 8:10 just so that I can do all of the things I need to do. But hope everyone, I think Toby might have started sharing the screen by accident. Tova, do you know how to undo that? Let's see if I can hold on.
Am I out of share now?
Yeah, you're out of share.
Okay.
Okay, I was trying to do it internally, but you figured it out. Okay. Thank you. So wanted to just give a heads up that there is a vote taking place tonight for the Jewish Community Relations Council. It's going to happen sometime between 8 and 9 o'clock. I don't know when it's going to be, but I might have to press pause just so that I can cast my vote. It was supposed to happen between 7 and 8, but they postponed it, and I'm a member of their councils, and I need to just cast my vote. So if I have to press pause, you'll forgive me.
What are they voting on?
That would take us the entire session to discuss and debate, but they are voting on a resolution to remove the Zionists Orthodox of America from their membership. So it's a pretty contested process. And I've been involved as I'm actually a representative of the Orthodox Union and of the Vad Harabanim of Boston. So a discussion for another time. But I do have the responsibility as a member of their council to cast a vote. So they're supposed to send me a text right before the vote, so I don't have to waste any more time on it than I already have. Okay, so I'm on my phone. I hope you can still see and hear me okay. Just give me a thumbs up that it's all good. Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. So we are beginning this evening the fourth and final section of the Melachot of Shabbat, which begins on page 488 in our workbook. And tonight we actually will be using the workbook a bit once we get to the Malacha of Mochek. But just to give a general overview of the fourth section, this is the final set with the activities that were required for the building of the structure of the Mishkan. And within that set, we begin with Kotev, which is the need to mark the krashim, which were the beams that were used in the Mishkan. They worked together in sockets so that the beams were paired. So they were, Aleph and Aleph were together, and then Bet and Bet were together. And so they had to be matched up using the matching letters in order to identify them, to easily put them back together. So each beam had a letter on it, and those two letters is what is considered the malacha of Kotev. So the principle is forming an image that communicates a message, and the the tolda of this is writing or drawing any kind of letter, form, symbol, or picture, even in a semi-permanent way, on a surface that is distinct from the writing. So let's take a few examples of where kotev might be an issue on Shabbat. Who wants to suggest one?
Drawing in sand.
That's a good test case. That's
Wait,
really
did I don't know
Yeah.
if I got that right.
that's a good one. That's a good one. It's a test case because it's really on the border between something which leaves a lasting impression and not, right? But let's take a more clear-cut case of like birthday cakes. That always comes up. Writing happy birthday. Let's say you have it's a cold day and the heat is by the window and there's a little bit of a sort of some moisture on the window. Can you write your name on that window or on a car window? Not that you're driving in, but that's there on Shabbat. And then we'll take maybe another case of the sandbox, right? If can you write your name in the sand? Right. Another example that's often raised is Scrabble. Can one play Scrabble on Shabbat? Is there a difference between different kinds of Scrabble sets? So let's go through some of the. I'm just going to take some notes. Any other examples or scenarios you can think of off the top of your head?
Like an Etch-a-Sketch kind of toy or something like that.
Good. Okay.
This is maybe a little odd, but like if you work out ahead of time that like something to communicate, like, I don't know, if I went to Ames Street, I'm gonna put the red sock on the table, and if I went to the other park, I'm gonna put the blue sock on the table or something like that. Like which is not a thing we've done ever. But I'm saying, like, is that like writing to communicate a message? Because like the point is to communicate a message, right?
Right, but it's not an act of writing, it's more an act of signaling, right?
Yeah, but that's the same with a Scrabble tile, right?
Well, Scrabble, we're going to talk about why Scrabble is okay. And it has to do with the permanence of the placement and the relationship between the letters. But the malacha, as I mentioned a moment ago, is about using ink to write permanent marks on letters on the beams of the Mishkan. And it's doing so with your normal hand in a way that it remains, that it's going to remain there relative to its surface. So this is true, if the writing is done, of course, with a pen and paper in a classic kind of way, or even writing happy birthday using icing on a cake, or even using Cheerios to form letters on the table in order to create some sort of communication. So if it's permanent writing, then it's going to be a Torah prohibition. If it's temporary writing, even if it won't stay long on the surface, like writing on a wet window or forming letters with toothpicks, then it's going to be asur midrabanan. And the permitted category is if it's intangible writing. So if it's writing in the air and it doesn't leave any impression at all, then it's not going to be considered writing. So Michelle, I would say that your last example is more of like an intangible signaling, because it's not creating any impression, any lasting change on a surface as a result of the blue or the red sock. So just playing out some of the other examples in terms of the car window, so or the wet window, that's going to be temporary writing because it will stay there for some period of time, even if it's just a few seconds. Whereas writing in the sand often will not even last a second. If the sand is completely dry, then it really will just fall back into place. If it's wet sand, and it will last, even for a few seconds, then it's going to be asur midrabanan. When it comes to Scrabble, there is a difference between the regular board and the Scrabble Deluxe. For any skilled Scrabble player, you'll know the difference between them is that the deluxe version on the board has set places in which you put the letters such that they are considered to be fixed. And by placing them in a designated area, that gives them a sense of permanence, whereas just placing them on a random square on the board is like loosely placing cards, next to each other, and not creating an impression of anything for any kind of fixed amount of time. And so a distinction is made in terms of playing Scrabble on Shabbat, that one can use the regular board, but not the deluxe board. So that sort of covers, I think, the examples that the Etch-a-Sketch is also going to be in the middle category, that it lasts and makes an impression for a certain amount of time. Until you shake it or enough time passes, the pieces of metallic, I don't know exactly how it works, but the metallic impression will stay. And therefore, if you're going to use your Etch-a-Sketch, just to draw randomly, that's one thing. But if you're going to use it to draw a figure or anything that creates any meaning of significance, then it's going to be a problem because it makes an impression on the surface and it lasts. So those are the three categories of kotev, and some of the gezerot that are applied to them which are activities that are connected to the act of writing, are the gezerah against doing business of mekach and mimkar on Shabbat, which is why we don't do any kinds of kinyanim, any kinds of transactions on Shabbat, unless that is for the purpose of something that can be used on Shabbat. So you can gift someone a bottle of wine on Shabbat or food on Shabbat, but you can't say, I'm gifting you this baseball glove or something that is not for the sake of oneg Shabbat. And so that's the first gezerah, that we don't make any kinyanim on Shabbat. The second has to do with reading business material. So one should not read ads associated with with any kind of business solicitation or kind of opportunity. And so of course we read magazines on Shabbat. We might read the OU Action magazine on Shabbat, and it has ads in it, right? So is that a problem? Sort of. We shouldn't be focusing on the ads. So there are some, in Israel, there's a big industry of pamphlets that are put out on Shabbat in shuls. And there was a great debate about whether those could have ads in them or not. And so there was sort of a dividing line, because if there's ads in it, of course, people are going to read that on Shabbat, because this is consumed exclusively on Shabbat. It's put out there on Shabbat morning for people to read about the Parsha. So it's preferable to not have ads, but for something like the Jewish Action or a regular newspaper, you can read it on Shabbat. You just shouldn't spend time in the classified section, planning out your next business move. Okay, so that's the malacha of kotev, of writing, and let's go on to the next one of mochek, and this one has some source is in the textbook. Any other questions about kotev before we move on to mochek?
Rabbi, I just thought of maybe this is similar to Scrabble, but what about a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle that has words, like that you would be making words by putting the pieces together? Is that different, the same?
It's a great question. And we happen to be jigsaw puzzle people on Shabbat. So I have a little bit of skin in the game. But I will tell you that there is an array of opinions on this. And the Lamitet Melachot Sefer, which I was going through in preparation for this year, suggests that if there is writing in that jigsaw puzzle, it's best to not do that writing section. And if there is an image which is formed on the as a result of the picture, a result of the puzzle, which is, I would say, most puzzles, then it's best to not complete it. So the practice in our home is to do jigsaw puzzles, but to leave a piece or two remaining, which drives my kids crazy. But at least it's not a complete formation of an image. That's, a stricter view. Some say that they're completely permissible, but that's our that's my suggestion in terms of jigsaw puzzles on Shabbat, to show that you're not doing a complete portrayal of the image by leaving one piece out. Does that make sense?
So what jigsaw puzzle is missing a piece? Can you do it all except for the missing piece?
In my family, that's standard.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just curious, is the opinion that would say it's totally permissible, is that because it's not a permanent, you're gonna take the part at some point?
Yeah, but the issue is that it will stay there unless you do something to it.
Right.
Whereas something which is really temporary will fade sort of immediately and not last at all.
Yeah.
So the question is really about whether or not by sketching, or whether you're really drawing or not, by doing the puzzle piece, by putting the puzzle pieces together. So if you don't do a complete picture, then you've demonstrated that you're not doing a complete act of drawing on Shabbat. But it's a stretch already to say that doing a puzzle is drawing. But if you want to make that stretch, then you can mitigate that issue by leaving a piece or two out. But what I also share with parents, especially when we're getting into this Dirabanan, Gezerah territory, is that it's important to always consider what are the alternatives to doing these kinds of activities on Shabbat, right? Puzzles, I think, all things considered, are a good family activity for Shabbat. Certainly, if it's going to keep kids, from doing other things that are less Shabbistic, it would be an appropriate thing to do as a family on Shabbat. But just important to always keep the bigger picture in mind when determining whether something in the gray zone is, a good idea or not. Okay. Let's move on to mochek, to erasing. And this was necessary in the construction of the Mishkan because even the expert craftsmen were human and sometimes made mistakes when they were labeling the beams in taking them apart and reassembling them during all of the different encampments of the Jewish people during the 40 years in the desert. And so on occasion, they would write an incorrect letter and that would need to be erased and in order to put the correct letter in its place. So for the Malacha of Mochek, I'll direct you to page 490, where we will see a few of the sources inside. So on the top, we see the primary source in the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, which says, Hakotev shtei otiyot, someone who writes two letters, v'hamochek al menat lichtov shtei otiyot. And similarly, someone who erases in order to write two letters is going to be in violation of mochek on Shabbat. So the question is, what if one erases one letter on Shabbat? Is that going to be a problem of mochek or not? Any suggestions? So of course, the best answer when we're not sure is it depends. So if you skip the next source and go to the Gemara in Shabbat, 2 dapim later, in the orange box where it says Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Katav otachad gdola, if you write just one letter, v'yesh b'makoma lichtov shtayim patur, right? You write one big letter in a place where normal people would have written two, you're not in violation of kotev. You have to have both letters in order to violate it. However, machak ot gedola, but if you then erase one large letter, then you are in violation of mochek for erasing one letter in a place where two could be written, because you are doing something which enables the writing of two letters. So in some ways, mochek is more stringent than kotev. The Shulchan Aruch codifies this halacha in the skipping one green box, the green box below it, of hamochek dayo sha'al haklaf o sha'ava sha'al hapinkas. So whether you're erasing ink that is on a hide or a sort of ink that is on a pinkas, which is like a certain material that was used for etching things on, then if you've erased enough space so that two letters can be written, then you are chayav, even if you don't end up writing those two letters, right? So mechika al menat lichtov is certainly going to be a problem, but even erasing not for the sake of writing is going to be a problem. So that's how the Rama codifies this, skipping one box, going to the green box below. And this is going to relate back to our birthday cake example about how to eat birthday cake on Shabbat. So the Rama says, Asur lishvor uga shekatav aleha kamin otiyot, that it is a problem to break apart a cookie that has letters on it. Even though your intention is, after breaking it apart with your hands, to eat it, it's still considered mochek. So how can you eat an Oreo cookie on Shabbat? So the answer is that you can eat an Oreo cookie on Shabbat, but you should not, for two reasons. One is that the writing on the Oreo cookie is part of the cookie itself.
8:30.
Right? And it's not a distinct entity from the cookie. So whereas frosting on a cake is going to be a separate entity, it was formed at a different time, and therefore it's considered to be writing, something which is molded to have a sign or a shape. isn't considered to be writing, and therefore it's not considered to be erasing either. The second reason you can eat an Oreo cookie on Shabbat is that you usually break it apart when it's in your mouth. And that's considered an act of eating, as opposed to an act of dividing or erasing letters. So if you were to take the Oreo cookie, well, it's not, if you were to take something else and divide it up, with your hands prior to eating it, then it would be a problem. But if you're going to be breaking it apart while in the act of eating, then it's really an act of eating, not an act of erasing. So one way to deal with the birthday cake letters on Shabbat is if you give someone a piece with all of the letters, they can eat that and break it apart in their mouth, because that's not breaking the letters. Another way to deal with the birthday cake situation is to cut between the letters, but not to break them apart, because dividing between the letters is not the same as breaking a letter apart. Breaking a letter apart is considered to be an issue of mochek, but dividing between letters is not. So the question always follows, what about script writing, right? Where they're actually breaking apart between two letters. So Rav Moshe Feinstein says that as long as you're breaking between the letters such that each of the letters is still an independent entity, then you can even cut between script letters with your knife on a birthday cake on Shabbat and give different people those letters that they will then further break apart in their mouth. Okay. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah here says in the next box down, the purple box, where he says, "Dehavi mochek, ve'af de'eno al menat lichtov isura d'Rabbanan mihu ika." So even if you are erasing something not for the sake of rewriting on top of it or instead of it, it's going to be a prohibition on a d'Rabbanan level. And then skipping the next line, he says, "V'yesh lismoch alav kishe'eno shover b'makom ha'otiyot bi'ado rak b'piv derech achila." And you can always be makil to rely on eating something as the means of breaking it apart, but not doing so manually with a knife or with your hands. Okay. So
Going back to that birthday cake where you said you could give someone a piece with multiple letters on it, if they're going to eat it, then they shouldn't be using their fork to eat it.
it depends how they use their fork, right? If they use their fork to cut through the letters, then you're 100% correct. If they use their fork to go underneath, the letters and scoop them up and then eat them, while they are, put them intact while they're in their mouth, depending on how big the slice is, how big the fork is, how big the mouth is, right? That second way would be fair game. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So let's actually look at page 498. Gives a little bit more detail in terms of the scenario that you were just raising, Janie. So should mochek apply to food items? So although we can understand how erasing is relevant to writing on a piece of paper, is it also applicable to destroying letters that are found in food as well? So there are a few examples that are given here, 1, 2, and 3, these different cases. So the first one is eating or cutting a food that's made into a specific shape or letter, right? So let's say you have a cookie that's made into a, an aleph or a bet. Can you cut or eat that cookie? The answer is yes. Okay. Because that is destroying just one letter that is not in relation to another letter, and therefore it is not a meaningful symbol in its own right. And therefore, if you have, you know, let's say a cake that's made in the shape of a Sefer Torah, right, which is a symbol, and you can still cut it up because that's the shape of the entire entity, of the entire thing. There's no writing that took place between a substance and a surface, right? That's where mechika becomes an issue. Okay, so what about eating a cupcake that has writing on it? Okay, so that's going to be more relevant to the discussion we're having about birthday cakes, which is this third example, right? Cutting food such a large cake with writing on it. The difference with a cupcake is that you can usually eat the whole thing with your mouth. You don't have to break it up into pieces. So it's probably be easier to circumvent the issue of mochek. Now, when it comes to a birthday cake, I think we've already discussed that there are several different ways to go about it. There's actually a list on page 499 of options for dealing with a birthday cake on Shabbat. And so let's go through these 4 or 5 examples on the bottom of page 499 for suggestions for how to deal with it. So can we cut the letters before Shabbat and only separate them on Shabbat? So indeed, you're not, even if they're 2 separate substances, a surface and a material that's on top of it, there's no issue with separating letters on Shabbat, right? Just like we would for Scrabble, because they are not attached to each other. It's only if they were physically connected to each other through frosting or something that they are going to be an issue of cutting on Shabbat. So just to be a little bit more specific with what I was just saying, that letters on a birthday cake that are made of frosting are not considered connected to each other in the sense that it's not pulling apart something from something else, as long as it's between 2 letters and not within 1 letter. The next option here is slicing off all the writing with some of the icing beneath them, right? So that's another permissible option for taking, the whole happy birthday, thing. If you look on the picture on page 498, you can see that there's sort of a hard sort of chocolate raised area that has the whole happy birthday piece on it. So that whole thing can be removed and taken off. Right. One can also slice off the letters directly without any of the cake or icing beneath them. One can cut between the letters, and one can cut when, even if they are, whether they're block letters or they're script letters, as I was saying earlier, so long as one is not breaking the essential shape of the letter itself. So that's a lot about birthday cakes, but those are often questions that come up as we celebrate those milestones on Shabbat. 2 other minor cases that relate to kotev and mochek on Shabbat is with regard to library books. Oftentimes, library books have on the pages written, Sharon Library. So can one open and close such a book on Shabbat, or is that writing and erasing? So there's a range of opinions on this, and the Sefer Lamed Tet Melachot allows for it when there is not another book of a similar type available. Meaning, let's say you have two novels to read and you don't care which one you want to read on Shabbat, then choose the one without the letters on the pages. But if it's the only option you have, then you can do it because it's not really considered to be a classical act of writing or erasing, as those pages are shifted around. And the other example is a parochet, which has writing on it. Let's say a parochet for an Aron Kodesh. Let's say it has, the word, Torah on it. And on one side it has, Tet Vav, and then the other side it has Resh He. So when you split the parochet, you're taking the word apart and then putting it back together. Is that kotev and mochek on Shabbat? So the best advice is to not have a parochet that splits in the middle with writing on both sides. But if one does have such a parochet, the suggestion is not to close it completely, but to usually allow for some space between them so that it is not an entity forming a new complete adjacent entity on Shabbat. Okay, so that covers, I think, most of the issues related to Kotev and to Mochek. I want to try and go on a bit to talk about Bona and Soter. Any questions?
I have a quick question, and maybe this is out of the context because it really kind of veers in left field, but what about, I would say, like a Kindle or something that is a book replacement that I know there are electronics problems just separate, but like a Kindle that would be like writing and erasing words as you turn pages.
So there is a setting on Kindle where you can have it automatically turn the pages so that you don't have to press any buttons. The challenge with that is what I used to say to my students when I was a campus rabbi, when they would ask, can we go to class on Yom Tov? Right? There were no classes on Shabbos, but sometimes, let's say Shavuot or Sukkot, there were classes. So I said, there's nothing wrong going to listen to a lecture about philosophy on Sukkot. However, the challenge is that the environment that you put yourself in leads you to forget that it is Yom Tov, and you're more likely to do something by mistake. And you don't want to put yourself in an environment where you're more likely to do things by rote, like someone might ask you to plug in their laptop because you're sitting close to the outlet, or someone might ask you to hand you their pen that they dropped, or maybe you're leaving the classroom and you head to the elevator and you push the button because that's what you always do when you leave class on a regular day. So I think the same thing would apply to the Kindle, in that because you use the Kindle during the week and you're accustomed to scrolling and to adjusting, the pace, that you would almost, without thinking about it, end up modifying its use, which would be a problem on Shabbat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but then it's not at all an issue of writing or erasing, because I would think just intrinsically as words appear, disappear, like that would be an issue.
Well, as to whether or not writing on a computer is considered to be kotev and mochek, it's not really creating an actual impression. Like when you even when you type on a Word document, right? It's that there's nothing permanent about that. The only permanent piece is it existing on some microchip in some form, but it's not really making a permanent impression. And in terms of the automatic function for a page turner on a Kindle, again, you're not doing the erasing and the writing on yourself because you already set that up ahead of time. But the issue of doing of scrolling, on a phone or something on Shabbat is more going to be an issue of electronics and creating light than it is of mochek and kotev, because those that writing isn't really considered to be permanent writing. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Great. So let's briefly talk about Bona and Soter, and then next week we'll talk a little bit more about Ma'avir and Mechabe, which is kindling and extinguishing, which has more, and Makeh B'Patish, which has more to do with electricity and use of smartphones and things like that. So Bona and Soter. So the Av Melacha of Bona was, of course, setting up and dismantling the Mishkan. And here, Bona and Soter are really considered to be parallel or really opposite forms. So whatever is considered to be construction or fixing a building or creating a new vessel or a new kind of shelter would also be a problem in terms of taking it down and demolishing it. So let's define a little bit about what we mean when we say Bona. So there is the Malacha, there are sort of four, I would say, categories of Bona. The first is, I would say, the most intuitive, which is that of binyan, of building something that's fixed to the ground, because either it is literally attached or wedged into the ground, or because it's so heavy that it isn't meant to move. So something like a permanent door or a water faucet or a toilet seat or a refrigerator or a large bookcase, all of those things are going to be a problem of repairing in a permanent and complete way. And so like returning a sliding door to its track, or nailing an object to a wall, or fixing a shelf, to a large bookcase or a closet is going to be a problem of Bona. In terms of on a rabbinic level, so fixing or repairing in a way that makes it usable, even in a temporary and incomplete way, is going to be a problem. So let's say the doorknob falls off the door. So if you complete it, and fix it permanently, then that's going to be biblically prohibited. But even putting it back loosely without the screws is going to be a problem. So the best thing to do if a doorknob, falls out, you need a way to get in and out of the door, is you put a stick or a screwdriver or something in there, which is obviously on a temporary basis. And that would allow you to use the door on Shabbat. So that's the first category of Bona, of building. The second one is that of...
Can I ask about the door thing?
Sure.
Okay, so let's say that your kid pushes the screen off its track on the slider, right?
Yep.
Okay, so now you've got all these bugs coming into your house, right? You just have to live with the bugs? Like there's
So-
nothing about like Oneg Shabbat or not getting the food racked or anything that you can put the screen door back?
Well, I assume there's another door there as well, right? There's the glass.
Oh, I see. Close the glass door.
So I would say close the glass door, and or you can lean up the the sliding door, but it's usually not going to be so good at preventing the bugs from coming in if it's not in the track. So I would say just use the glass door in that situation, and then snap back the screen door after Shabbat. So in terms of Ohel, so here I think about the favorite activity in my house at 6 a.m. on Shabbos morning, which is forts. Okay, taking all of the cushions off the couch, all of the sheets and comforters off the beds, and making the ultimate fort, especially when we were all shuttered at home over the winter. This was an activity that lasted hours. So is that okay on Shabbat? So in the Mishkan, of course, they would use the all of the hides that we've spoken about in the past few weeks and the cloth to cover over the top of the Mishkan to protect it. And so in that primary case, it was used to guard the area underneath it against rain or sun or dust. And so if one is setting something up for the purpose of using it as a cover, then it's going to be a problem. However, if the shelter already existed, it's already attached to a building or to an object, it's already sort of built in, then it can be open and closed on Shabbat, even if it wasn't already covering an area. So, for instance, one can open an awning on Shabbat to close, over a picnic table, on the side of their house, or even to close the hood of a baby carriage is fair game on Shabbat. However, one is not meant to use an umbrella on Shabbat. Now, this is a shiur into its own about the history of why one should not use an umbrella on Shabbat. But to sum it up in a sentence, it's really considered to be a violation of the malacha of bona, of erecting a type of protective covering that is not part of a pre-existing structure. So the question is, if an umbrella is already open, can you use it on Shabbat if you're not creating the ohel on Shabbat? So some are lenient to allow one to carry, an umbrella that's already opened and to leave it open, but others recommend against it because it has the appearance of sin, lest onlookers be led to believe that one opened and closed, the umbrella on Shabbat. So umbrellas are out, but the Shmir Shabbat Kilchatan, the Lamitet Melachot, would allow for the opening of a awning, and even for those that have outdoor patio furniture where the umbrella is firmly attached into the ground or into a base, that's considered to be something which is permanent and already there and functioning, and not the creation of something new, but just the extension of something that's already in place. So it's a little bit of a fine line between umbrella, that one uses for the rain, and umbrella that one would use for the sun by a picnic table. But nevertheless, that line is drawn in the poskim. And getting back to the initial example of a fort on Shabbat, so if it is completely, temporary and would be undone very easily by moving, a sheet a few inches, then it's not really considered to be permanent enough to be a problem on Shabbat. Another common example of this is opening up a folding table on Shabbat. There, because you're really just using it for the top and not for the bottom, just like a folding chair, its use isn't as a cover, but its use is for the top. And that's too dissimilar from the malacha of ohel to be a problem on Shabbat. The third, Janie.
So I know that there are these little like tents, but they're pods, that you can, it's a screened in kind of structure that you could have one or two people in. Is that something that if it's already set up that you can use, even if it means you have to unzip it in order to get in and zip it, afterwards to keep the bugs out? Is that something you can use or not?
Yes, that's already an existent ohel. So like if you're camping on Shabbat, you can go in and out of your tent. If you have a screened in, eating area, you can certainly go in and out of that because you're not creating a new cover that creates shelter on Shabbat. You're just using it.
Be set up before Shabbat in order to use it on Shabbat.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so the next iteration of the malacha of boneh is that of erecting a mechitza. So a mechitza is right a halachic wall, and something that would withstand a regular wind is going to be a problem. So like putting up, a wall in a sukkah is going to be a problem on Shabbat. However, one is allowed to unfold one of those those 3-section partition, because to create a different space, to whether it's to block out, a certain scene, or as a mechitza in, a minyan, because that is not a permanent structure, and it's not going to it's not meant for part of a shelter. It's really just meant for dividing between spaces. So if a wall is being used as part of a shelter, like it was for the Mishkan, then it's going to be a problem. But if it's for the sake of privacy, then it is permissible. So that I think the most common, or one of the common instances of that is setting up a mechitza on Shabbat for the purpose of davening, which would be permissible for that reason, because A, it's not permanent, and B, it's not part of a structure with a roof on top of it. So the final category of boneh has to do with binyan kli, of creating and building a good usable vessel. And so here the best way around making a kli is to make a broken or damaged kli. So the most common manifestation of this is bottle caps. When it comes to opening soda cans on Shabbat, so a cap which undergoes no change when the bottle is open may be removed on Shabbat. However, if there is a seal ring which is part of the cap, one may not open such a bottle cap on Shabbat, since this is considered creating a good vessel in the form of a bottle cap that will be used many times to close the bottle afterwards. So in order to open this type of bottle for the first time on Shabbat, one would need to puncture the top, because that would create a damaged vessel. So my view on this is to follow the position that distinguishes between plastic and metal soda caps. Metal is a material that has a longer lasting permanence and can be used as a vessel. So I will I discourage opening let's say grape juice or wine that has a metal cap to it, but something that is plastic, like most sodas, would be fine, but it's certainly preferable to open up those ahead of time before Shabbat starts. And if one gets stuck, and one needs to open up a tuna can or a sparkling grape juice on Shabbat, you can puncture the bottom or the top in a way that creates a damaged vessel, so that it's not creating a complete new vessel. So that's briefly the issue of bottle caps on Shabbat. Any questions or comments or thoughts on that? Okay. Sila, I see you ask, is straightening a crooked picture on the wall prohibited because in this example of Bona? That's a good question. I would say that if it's already up there in a permanent way, so you're not putting it up there in a permanent way, but you are fixing it in a way that you want to leave it there for a long time, right? It's different than your example you gave about hanging up a happy birthday sign on a hook that's already there, which is really just meant for a temporary time. I would say that fixing it in a permanent way to straighten it would be a problem on Shabbat. Even though you're not creating something new, I would say there's an issue of muksa, that you shouldn't be touching something which doesn't serve a function on Shabbat. So that's the hurdle. That's the first issue. But putting that aside, I would also be a problem, I think, of fixing something in its permanent, proper fashion on Shabbat. So I would discourage fixing picture frames even after a ball, goes into them and makes them crooked. I would wait until Motzei Shabbat to do so.
It's one of those things that ever since someone told me that, that's all I think about on Shabbat is how crooked all my pictures are. Like I can't stop looking at them. And I wish no one ever mentioned it to me because I would probably never think about it. But
Yeah, it's sometimes when you have the time to notice and appreciate things, like on Shabbat, that they bother you. So you can be patient and fix it after Shabbat. Any other questions about Kotev or Mochek or Bona or Soter?
Oh, I had a question about I'm just trying to think about why, like you said, a cake in the shape of where the whole cake is like a shape, like from a mold, like a Sefer Torah, for instance, or how is that different from, and that you can mochek, like you can cut, but how is that different from like cutting one letter? Isn't one letter also like a wholly formed, like shape that, I'm trying to figure out what the difference between that, a letter, like a form or a I don't know what you call that, some other symbol, is.
So it's a great question, and it has to do with the fact that in order to be to transgress mochek, you first have to transgress kotev, and making a cake in the shape of a Sefer Torah isn't considered to be kotev in the same way that if you just have a cookie that's shaped as an olive, right? Making that isn't considered kotev. It's considered, using. It's really just considered to be making a cookie in a shape. Kotev is classically defined as using ink, a separate material that goes on a substance and connects to that substance, forming a new entity. And so just forming a cookie in a shape or a birthday cake is not going to be an issue of kotev, and therefore it's not an issue of mochek. Whereas writing a letter using frosting on top of a birthday cake is in violation of kotev, which is why one would need to be more careful with cutting that letter, because that transgressed kotev, or and therefore mochek is more of an issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's not the shape of the letter. It's not the fact that it looks like a letter, is how it was formed.
Exactly.
It must be one material on a surface. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Sure thing. Okay. I apologize for starting a bit late and going a bit late, but we covered a lot of good ground tonight, and looking forward to continuing next week with Mavir and Mechabe and Makeh B'Patish. I wish everyone a wonderful evening, and
Thank you.
see you next week.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
bef-